I cannot for my soul remember how, when, or even precisely where I first became acquainted by the Lady LIGEIA. Long years have since elapsed, and my memory is feeble through much suffering. Or perhaps I cannot now bring these points to my mind, because in truth the character of my beloved, her rare learning, her singular yet placid cast of beauty, and the thrilling and enthralling eloquence of her slow music language made their way into my heart by paces so steadily and steadily progressive that they have been unnoticed and unknown. There is one dear topic on which my memory fails me not. It is the person of LIGEIA. In stature she was tall, somewhat slender, and in her later days even emaciated. I could in vain attempt to portray the majesty, the quiet ease of her demeanor, or the incomprehensible lightness and elasticity of her footfall. She came to me. She came in departing as a shadow. I was never made aware of her entrance into my close study, save by the dear music of her low sweet voice, and she placed her marble hand upon my shoulder, and beauty of face no maiden ever equaled her. It was the radiance of an opium. It was an opium dream. An iron spirit life in vision more gayly divine than the fantasies which our vision about slumbering souls of daughters of Delos. Yet her features were not that regular, the ones that we face every day. There is no exquisite beauty, says Bacon Lord Veralon, speaking truly of all the forms of genera of beauty without some strangeness in the portion. Yet, although I saw that the features of LIGEIA were not a classic regularity, although I perceived that her loveliness was indeed exquisite, I felt that there were much strangeness pervading, and yet I have tried in vain to detect the regularity and trace home to my own perception. There is no point among the many incomprehensible anomalies of the science of my mind more strangely exciting than the fact never I believe noticed in the school, that in our endeavors to recall the memory, something long forgotten, we often find ourselves upon the very verge of remembrance, without being able in the end to remember, and thus how frequently in my intense scrutiny of LIGEIA's eyes I have felt approaching to fully know their expression. I found in the commonest objects of the universe a circle of analogies of that expression. I mean to say that, subsequently to the period when LIGEIA's beauty passed into my spirit, where dwelling in a shrine, I derived from many existence in the material world a sentiment such as I felt aroused within me by her large and luminous orbs. Yet no the more could I define the sentiment or analyze or even steadily view it, and I recognize it, let me repeat, sometimes in the survey of a rapid grown divine, in the contemplation of a month, a butterfly, a stream of running water I have felt in the ocean, in the falling of a meteor I have felt in the glances of initial age people.
the gloomy and dreary grandeur of the building, the almost savage aspect of the domain, the many melancholy and time-honored memories connected with both, had much in unison with the feelings of the utter abandonment which had driven me into that remote and unsocial region of the country. Yet, although the external abbey with its burden decay having about it suffered by little alteration, I gave way with a childlike perversity and perchance with a faint hope of alleviating my sorrows to a display of modern regal magnificent within. But this absurdity might not stop to detail. Let me speak only of that one chamber. Ever occurs within a moment of mental alienation, I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor, yes, the successor of the unforgotten LIGEIA, the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Trevane. There is no individual portion of the architecture and decoration of that bridal chamber which is not now visible before me. In halls such as this, in a bridal chamber such as this, I passed with the Lady of Tremaine the unwhole hours of the first month of our marriage, passed them with but little disquietude. That my wife dreaded the fierce smoothness of my temper, that they chided me and loved me but little. I could not help perceiving, but it gave me rather pleasure than otherwise. I loved her with a certain beloved more to demon than to man. My memory flew back. Oh, with what intensity of regret to LIGEIA. Yes, to the beloved, the Argos, the beautiful, the entomb. I reveal in recollection of her purity, of her wisdom, of her passionate, her idolatrous love. Now, then did my spirit fully and freely burn with more than all the fires of her own. In the excitement of my opium dreams, for I was eventually furry in the shackle of the drug, I will call aloud upon her name during the silence of the night. During the silent of the night of Armand, the shelter rest of the gents by day, as if through the wide earnest, the solid passion, the consuming ardor of my longing for the departed, I could restore her to the path which she had abandoned. Ah, could it be forever? Upon the earth. About the commencement of the second month of marriage, the Lady Rowena was attacked with the sudden illness from which her recovery was slow. The fever which consumed her repeated her nights uneasy, and in her perturbed state half slumber, she spoke of sound and emotion in and about the chamber of the truant, which I conclude had no origin save in the distorted of her fancy, or perhaps in the phantasmagoric influences of the chamber itself. She became left convalescent, finally well. Yet but a brief period elapsed ere a second more violent disorder, again through her open embedded suffering, and from his attack her frame at all times feeble, never altogether recovered. Her illness were after this epic of alarming character and of alarming recurrency, defying alike the knowledge and the great exertion of her physicians. With the increase of the chronic disease which had thus apparently taken too sure hold upon her constitution to be eradicated by human means, I could not fail to observe a similar increase in the nervous irritation of her temperament, and in her excitability by trivial cause of fear. She spoke again, and now more frequently and pertinaciously of the sounds, of the slight sounds, and of the unusual motions among the tapestries, to which he had formerly alluded. One night, near the closing in of September, she pressed this distressing subject with more than usual emphasis upon my attention. She had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching with feelings half of anxiety, half of bad tears, the working of her immensity currents. I sat by the side of her ebony bed. She appeared to be fainting, and no attendants were within call. I remember where was disappointed at the character of light wine which had been ordered by her physicians, and I hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of our sterling nature attracted my attention. I had felt that some palpable, although invisible, object had passed light by my person, and I saw that there lay open the golden carpet in the very middle of the rich lustre threw from the censer a shadow, a faint infinity shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of the immoderate dose of opium, and hear it of the to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber and poured out the globule full, which I felt to the lips of the fainting lady. She had now partially recovered, however, and took the vessel herself, while sat upon the ottoman near me, with my eyes facing upward her person. It was then that I became distantly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet and near the couch. And in a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may I have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet as if from some invisible spring in the atmosphere of the ruin, 3 or 4 large robes of brilliant and ruby-colored fluid. If not so Rowena. She swallowed the wine unintentionally and for to speak to her of a circumstances which must, after all, I consider had been but the suggestion of a vivid imagination, rendered morally acted by the theory of the lady, by the opium, and by the hour. The hour. Yet I cannot conceal it from my own perception. I cannot conceal it but my own perception, that immediately subsequent to the fall of the ruby drops, a rapid change from the worst took place. The disorder of my wife, so that on the third subsequent night, the hands of her menials prepared her for the tomb, and on the fourth I sat alone with her shrouded body in that fantastic chamber which had received her as a bride. Yes, in the same chamber. I gazed with unquiet eye upon Sakungati and the angels of the room, upon the variety figures of the drapery, and upon the wreathen and party-colored fires in the censer overhead. My eyes then fell, as I called to mind the circumstances of a former night, to the spot beneath the glare of the censer where I have seen the faint traces of the shadow. It was there, however, no longer, and breathing with greater freedom. I turned my glances to the pallid and rigid figure upon the bed. Then rushed upon me 1,000 memories of LIGEIA. 1,000 memories, and then came back upon my heart with the violence of a flood, the whole of the unuttered woe with which I had regarded her thus, and shouted. The night waned, and still, with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one only and supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena.
It might have been midnight or perhaps earlier or later, for I had taken no notes of time, when a sob, low, gentle but very distinct, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of ebony, from the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror, but there was no repetition of the sound. I strained my vision to detect any motion in the corpse, but there was not the slightest perceptible. Yet I could not have been deceived. I had heard the noise, however faint, and my soul was awakened within me. I resolutely and perseveringly kept my attention riveted upon the body. Many minutes elapsed before any circumstance occurred tending to throw light upon the mystery. At length, it became evident that a slight, very feeble and barely noticeable tinge of color had flushed up within the cheeks and along the sunken small veins of the eyelids. Through a species of unutterable horror and awe for which the language of mortality has not sufficiently energetic expression, I felt my heart cease to beat. My limbs grew rigid where I sat. Yet a sense of duty finally operated to restore my self-possession. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our preparations, that Rowena still lived. It was necessary that some immediate exertion be made, yet Torret was altogether apart from the portion of the abbey tenanted by the servants. There were none within call. I had no means of summoning them to my aid without leaving the ruin for many minutes, and this I could not venture to do. I therefore struggled alone in my endeavors to call back the spirit ill hovering. In a short period, it was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The color disappeared from both eyelid and cheek, leaving a oneness even more than that of marble, and the lips became doubly shriveled and pinched up in the ghastly expression of death. A repulsive clamminess and coldness overspread rapidly the surface of the body, and all the usual rigorous illness immediately supervened. I fell back with a shudder upon the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to passionate waking visions of LIGEIA. An hour thus elapsed when, could it be possible, I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened. In extremity of horror, the sound came again. It was a sigh rushing to the corpse. I distinctly saw a tremor upon the lips. In a minute afterward, they relaxed, disclosing a bright line of the pearly teeth. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with the profound awe which had hitherto reigned there alone. I felt that my vision grew dim, that my reason wandered, and it was only by a violent effort that I at length succeeded in nerving myself to the task which duty thus once more had pointed out. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead and upon the cheek and throat, and perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even a slight pulsation at the heart. The lady lived. Yeah. the lady lived, and with redoubled ardor I betook myself to the task of restoration. I shaved and bathed the temples and the hands, and used every exertion which experience and no little medical reading could suggest, but in vain. Suddenly the color fled, the pulsation ceased, the lips resumed the expression of the death, and in an instant afterward the whole body took upon itself the icy chilliness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity, the sunken outline, and all the loathsome peculiarities of that which has been for many days a tenant of the tomb. And again I sunk into visions of LIGEIA, and again there reached my ears a low sob from the region of the ebony bed. But why shall I immediately detail the unspeakable horrors of that night, and how each struggle was succeeded by I know not what a wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse? Let me hurry to a conclusion. The greater part of the fearful night had worn away, and she who had been dead once again stirred, and now more vigorously than hitherto, although arousing from a dissolution more appalling in its utter hopelessness than any I had long ceased to struggle or to move, and remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible, the least consuming. The corpse, I repeat, stirred, and now more vigorously than before. The hues of life flushed up with unwonted energy into the countenance. The limbs relaxed, and save the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and that the bandages and draperies of the grave still imparted their charnel character to the figure. I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death, but if this idea was not, even then, altogether adopted, I could at least doubt no longer when, arising from the bed, tottering with feeble steps and with closed eyes, and with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced boldly and palpably into the middle of the apartment. I trembled not. I stirred not, for a crowd of terrible fancies connected with the air, the stature, the demeanor of the figure rushing hurriedly through my brain had paralyzed, had chilled me into a stun. I stirred not, but gazed upon the apparition. There was a mad disorder in my thoughts, a tumult unappeasable. Could it indeed be the living Rowena who confronted me? Could it indeed be Rowena at all? The fair-haired, the blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine? Why? Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily about the mouth, but then might it not be the mouth of the breathing lady of Tremaine? And the cheeks, there were the roses, as in her noon of life. Yes, this might indeed be the fair cheeks of the living lady of Tremaine. And the chin, with its dimples, as in health, might it not be hers? But had she then grown taller since her malady? What inexpressible madness seized me with that thought. When bound and I had reached her feet, shrinking for my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened the ghastly cerements which had confined it, and there steamed forth into the rushing atmosphere of the chamber huge masses of long and disheveled hair. It was blacker than the raven winds of the midnight, and now slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. Here then, at least, I shriek aloud. Can I never be mistaken? These are the full and the black and the white eyes of my lost love, of the lady Ligeia.